Hi guys, welcome to the new video and I hope everyone is doing good in this hard times. And so I have had a plenty of time during lockdown to find some of the most amazing podcasts for you guys, and here is a list of my top favorite podcasts from different genres for 2020, and you definitely should try these podcasts out. So number one is storytelling, and under this, Bhaskar Bose. So it's a crime thriller podcast where a smart detective, Bhaskar Bose, and his aide Bikeshta solve cases in their very unique style. This is a different kind of a storytelling podcast. The podcast makes you actually feel at the scene of the story with its sound effects and the way hosts speak for the podcast. Best part is that most episodes are under 20 minutes, so it's very interesting to listen and it definitely keeps you hooked for the whole episode. Number two, history and mythology. Under this, the podcast you should listen to is Stories of Mahabharat. So while listening to this podcast, you'll learn about the background of Krishna, his spiritual philosophies, and of course about the epic Mahabharat. This podcast gets even more interesting because of the host's way of storytelling, because he depicts the emotion of each of the characters in the story so well that it's much more worth listening to this podcast than going and watching a web series or a TV series based on Mahabharat. So number third, under true crime. So if you really like watching Crime Patrol or you like true crime stories, then you definitely should listen to Khooni, the true crime stories of India. The hosts of this podcast, Neha and Aditi, are corporate lawyers and they go through each detail about the cases they discuss. Each episode has a different case where they discuss about the crimes and the criminals involved and what are the investigations that have happened or are happening right now. So each of the cases is well researched by the host before recording the podcast, and the case story is put out in a very interesting way. Next is inspiration, and I absolutely love listening to Ranveer and his podcast, The Ranveer Show. He is very consistent and has well-rounded conversations, and the best thing is you will learn a lot from Ranveer's podcast. He gets guests from all around the industry and talks everything about following your passion, motivation, startups, entrepreneurship, spirituality, nofap, and fitness. You will get a lot of value from Ranveer's podcast, and following and listening to him will definitely make you a better human being. I myself have learned a lot from Ranveer's podcast, so thanks to Ranveer for all the good work that he has put out. Next is travel and food, and under this, Highway on My Podcast is the podcast that I listen to every now and then. It's a podcast for you if you are a big time foodie who loves to travel to new cities and try out the best dishes, or you might even find something new to try in your own city as well. The host makes it a very funny and interesting listen, and you will definitely be left craving something good after you listen to the episode. Better listen to this podcast with a full stomach. Next is Musafir Stories, and it is a purely travel based podcast. And I've already included it in my last video of the top Indian podcasts. Musafir Stories has been very consistent with the episodes for past few years, and I absolutely love listening to Saif and Faiza's way of taking you around India. Each episode of Musafir Stories will leave you with a lot of knowledge about new cities and new places to explore. Since no one is able to travel right now, so there's no better time than now to listen to a travel podcast and make a list of new places to explore. Next up is cricket. Since a lot of you love cricket so much, this podcast discusses everything about cricket. 22 Yarns is hosted by Gaurav Kapoor, where he brings some really interesting conversations with people like Sunil Gavaskar, Harsha Bhogle, and a lot more other interesting guests, with discussions about past matches, great moments in history, and new strategies, and a lot more. If you love cricket to the core, you definitely should listen to this podcast. You'll get to know a lot of interesting facts about your favorite players. So these are some of the podcasts that have came up recently, and they are super interesting to listen because of the topics they cover. Number one is Special Mission. It's hosted by Gulpanag, and it features some of the most inspirational stories about fights against the enemy and determination of our soldiers. This podcast will make you feel proud and at the same time make you super motivated to join the armed forces. Number two in new podcast is Big Fat Indian Ghotala. As you would have got by the name, this podcast discusses about some of the Indian ghotalas that happen around us. The episodes of the podcast range from call center scams to banking scams. It depicts how a lot of Indians get scammed by these scammers. The host makes this podcast very fun to listen, with interesting stories of scams from all around the India and with a bit of satire. This podcast is a must listen to be aware about the scams that are happening all around us. Since this podcast is in Hindi, you can also recommend it to your parents to be aware and alert if such situations arise. And that's it for the favorite Indian podcasts of 2020. I have selected these podcasts based on the value they provide and their popularity. So if I have missed any amazing podcasts, you can write them down in the comments. Thanks for watching the video and do subscribe to my channel for more such content. Bye.